All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Next Man Up podcast. I'm your host, Bannon Crowley, and I'm my co-host, Colin Martin, with me today.
How's it going?
And today we got a lot to talk about in the NFL and the NBA. The NBA playoffs starting and definitely heating up. We'll talk about all the series and what we got going on as of our recording. And we got a few things to talk about in the NFL before the draft, which will be next week. And next week, we'll have our final mock draft. We'll go over everything pretty much that we want to talk about with that, some specific players. This week, we got a few notes that we'll talk about in the NFL. So we'll just start with that, get that out of the way. So now it looks like it's come out that Bryce Young will be going to Carolina. He canceled all his upcoming visits with all the other teams. And with him being the first pick, this doesn't really surprise me. I guess the only thing that really surprises me is that like we thought they were going to take CJ Stroud, but both of us came on here and have said the past month and a half since that Carolina got that trade in that he's still the best quarterback. So I think it's good that Carolina is finally locking in taking Bryce Young at 1.
Yeah, and with this news coming out, I do want to throw out there, this could genuinely still be smoke. You can never be sure with a pick like this. I wouldn't be locked in on the fact that Bryce Young is 100% going yet. I do think it's the correct decision. And, as we've talked about before, I think CJ Stroud is safe. I think he might have a higher floor. But if you trade up for the number one pick, you got to go for a guy that could change your franchise. And I think Bryce Young just might be that guy. So, who knows? Where I genuinely think this might be one of those drafts where we don't know who goes number one until it happens. But for now, with the news coming out that it's probably going to be Bryce Young, I don't think it surprises either of us too much.
Yeah, and depending on which one of these two guys goes first, I don't think that shakes up the board at all, really, because the next guy is going to go second either way, unless we see like an Anthony Richardson go at 1, which could still be in the cards from what we know.
Yeah, and honestly, with that being said, there's a lot of news coming out recently about Will Anderson going at number 2. If the Texans really don't feel like they have a new GM, they have a new head coach. If they feel like they could wait another year and they like guys like Caleb Williams or Drake May a little bit more, honestly, I wouldn't be too surprised. And then the whole board shakes up because, we're going to talk about the Cardinals in a minute, but we get to pick 4 Indy and they have the choice of Anthony Richardson or CJ Stroud. When in our mocks, they've only ever been able to choose Anthony Richardson. It puts them in a tough position. So I think, there is a little bit of a shakeup here because maybe we assume that Houston like Bryce Young more than CJ Stroud. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and if I'm the Texans and Bryce Young does end up going first, and we kind of planned for a while for taking Bryce Young, depending on what we heard, and we like Bryce Young as a franchise, I don't think taking Will Anderson is a step back. They're not going to get any better this year. They're probably going to end up, I bet that there'd be a top 3 pick next year. And even if you don't get Caleb Williams, even if you don't get the first overall pick, then you're still going to get a guy like Drake May or another quarterback that we'll see rise up, because there's going to be another guy that will probably be in that top 3 other talents next year. I don't know if I've said it yet on the podcast, but I think next year is going to be one of the greatest draft classes of all time. Feel pretty high on a lot of guys that are coming out. And also, Will Anderson has been my number 1 player in this draft throughout the whole process, throughout the past year. So if I'm the Texans and I can get him at 2 and you pass on a guy like CJ Stroud, I still think that's a good decision for the franchise, because if you're looking at the team with the first overall pick this year, the Panthers weren't the worst team. Obviously, they traded up to get that pick. And the Bears, who had the first overall pick, you're assuming they take a jump too with Justin Fields and everything they've added. And the Cardinals at 3, you're assuming they get a little better. So I still think the Texans, whether they get CJ Stroud or not, will probably be a top 3 pick next year anyway.
Yeah, and I agree with that.
So next up, like we mentioned before, we've been talking about possibilities with the Cardinals trading. I flirted with the idea in my last mock draft with them potentially trading with the Titans. And depending, I guess in this scenario, with us seeing CJ Stroud and Bryce Young go 1 and 2, kind of going away from that Will Anderson at 2 area, what do you think we'll see? Do you think that we'll see them stick and go with a guy like Will Anderson, or do you think there'll be a team trade up and draft a quarterback here?
Yeah, if I can be honest about Arizona, they're in a position right now where they need as much talent as they can get. All of their top talent is either leaving or, they're going to have to pay soon. And honestly, they're probably not coming back. So with that being said, I think you got to get as much as possible. So I do think you should trade down. You mentioned the Titans in our last mock draft. If the Titans are ready to give up on Malik Willis, if they see a much better improvement with a guy like Levis or Richardson, I say go for it. Team I want to talk about is the Lions, and I know this seems crazy, but if I'm the Lions and you're hoping that Anthony Richardson falls to 6 and you've fallen in love with that idea, you might want to go up to 3 for him. I mean, I know they have Jared Goff, but if you think about it, I've mentioned this before. What's riskier, betting that you can win a Super Bowl with Jared Goff or betting that you can develop Anthony Richardson? I think they're at least equal risks, in my opinion. And if you want a young quarterback to sit behind Goff for maybe this year, possibly even next year, which is something we don't see in the NFL a lot anymore, then you'll have, a ready quarterback when your younger guys, develop into stars, which is what you're hoping for. And then lastly, I just want to mention Indianapolis. I mean, they're at 4 already. If they are really hot on one of these quarterbacks and they don't want to get jumped, the perfect way to ensure that is to trade up. The Cardinals might not be getting as much value with something like that, but you pull in a second round pick, maybe an extra third, and then you just take the same player you're going to take at 3, at 4 anyways. I see a lot of value there. So I think there's a lot of different options. How are you feeling on this one?
Well, I think another option would be also Las Vegas moving up to jump the Colts specifically. The Lions one that you put out there, I agree with that too. I mean, I've seen that's definitely got some more traction recently, looking through some mock drafts, and I don't hate that idea, but Jared Goff did play well last year, so I wouldn't go too far away from that. Even if you can take, I would say I'm more against the idea of them drafting, moving up to take him at 3. If he falls at 6, I think it's a different story. But I think you got to stay with Jared Goff instead of moving your pieces to trade up. But a team that we could see, even like the Colts, could be a potential move, depending on what's going on with a team like Vegas that could trade up. But we've seen a lot of people talk about Anthony Richardson falling too. I mean, we've come on here kind of mocking him higher up just because we have him above Will Levis. But like we say, we don't really know. Will Levis could be loved by a lot of these GMs, so he could go. Anthony Richardson could fall, or we could definitely see Will Levis fall into that Aaron Rodgers draft day scenario where he was even at one point potentially the number 1 overall pick and then just completely fell all the way down the board to eventually the Packers. I think they got him at like 23. And Will Levis could see maybe not 23-ish area, but could see a fall. And a team like I guess an interesting scenario that I've thought about, if he does fall, do you think he would fall past the Patriots at 14? I know, I think you could see where I was going with that. And
yeah.
he does seem like an intriguing quarterback for Bill Belichick.
Yeah. So, I mean, for anybody that's new, this would be 3 straight years where the Patriots drafted a prospect I absolutely hated, with Cole Strange being up there. It would definitely be interesting. When I think about, what I predict teams are going to do, I listen to what the teams say the most. And Belichick has said he won't draft a QB early. It's up to him if he considers 15, 14 early, because this is exactly where he drafted Mac Jones after saying the same thing in 2020. So if I'm honest, I hope he falls past. I think a team you've mentioned going for quarterback that could trade up in a scenario like that would be Minnesota. You had him grabbing Hendon Hooker in a mock draft, which, I'm a big Hendon Hooker guy. But, the Patriots love to trade down. If he does get to that spot, I think we're more likely to see a team move with the Patriots to get him. Then I really hope the Patriots would not take him in that scenario.
I mean, that would be a great quarterback room. You got Will Levis, Mac Jones, and Trace McSorley. That's insane. I would take Trace McSorley as my quarterback.
I probably would too.
Also a team, I guess, in that area talking about falling is we have the Commanders at 16. And I think that'd be an interesting look because they've had bridge quarterbacks the past few years, new ownership coming in too. So they're looking, I mean, they could be in a spot where they could also trade up. I wouldn't be surprised if new ownership comes in and they're like, we want to go for our franchise guy. And if they believe in Will Levis, not even essentially having to trade up at 3, depending on what we see. If he does fall, then we could see them trade up to somewhere in the top 10, eventually probably above the Raiders, maybe even with the Lions at 6. So I think it's just, we'll come out with our official mocks next week, but just interesting how we'll see these quarterbacks go. And we don't even really know who's going to go number 1 overall. We have it between 2 guys, but it could be between 4 guys, really. Like, we just really don't know at this point.
Yeah, just before we move on, I just want to throw this out there. I mean, I've heard a lot of buzz about Anthony Richardson possibly going even number 1. He's polarizing in a sense because he really could go number 1. But as we were just talking about, I mean, he could be that guy that slips in that Aaron Rodgers category. So, I mean, these are my favorite type of draft classes. I think that's why we come on here and talk about it so much. When there's a level of unknown, that's when it gets fun. So I'm enjoying the talk. Next week's going to be fun with our official mock drafts.
Yeah. So moving on, Jalen Hurts signed the biggest contract in NFL history. I think it was this weekend, a few days ago. He signed a 5-year, $255 million contract. And this makes him have the most annual earnings. So I don't think it's the most overall, because I think Mahomes got like 500 million, but in some sense, he's getting the most money at some point. So I guess overall, first reactions to this, I'm not surprised. Obviously, he's going to be their Eagles franchise guy for a while, at least another 5 years. And I guess it's interesting to look at too, because we know how many players are going to have to pay coming up soon. Obviously, trading for AJ Brown last year, he's on a big contract. A lot of defensive players are going to be looking for big contracts. We even saw it this offseason. They're losing a few players too. But what do you think about this?
Yeah, so I mean, at first, I think I had the reaction of many, casual fans on social media saying, wow, this is a lot of money. It might be too much money. But if you think about the quarterback market, it's become clear that if you're going to pay somebody, it's going to be your quarterback. We saw the same thing with Mahomes a couple of years ago. I mean, we both know Jalen Hurts is no Mahomes, but he's closer to Mahomes than, one of these bridge quarterbacks that would be your other option, you know. So if we're being honest, if he did walk as a free agent, he would have got this money somewhere else. You think a team like, I don't know, if Houston doesn't draft a quarterback and they see Jalen Hurts on the market next year, they'd give him as much money as possible. So, I mean, with that being said, you got to pay a QB. You're the Eagles. You just won a Super Bowl with this guy, and he looks like he's getting better every year. I think it's justified, although it's a ton of money when you think about it. I think that's also makes the Mahomes deal look so much better because Mahomes, he makes less annually, and that actually locks him up for longer. It was a ridiculous deal. If I'm not mistaken, it was almost like 8 to 10 years in length.
I think it was 500 million over 10 years, maybe.
Yeah,
that's what I have on my head.
Yeah, and that's absolutely insane. So, obviously I don't think the Eagles were going to invest that much in Jalen Hurts, but it's good for team chemistry when a team just makes the Super Bowl and then you invest in your young QB. I think it sets you up correctly. And the Chiefs have made the money thing work with their big signings. I mean, Chris Jones, Travis Kelce, those guys are still on the roster. I think the Eagles are going to figure it out. They have a top 10 pick this year. As long as they draft wisely and spread their money the right way throughout the rest of the team, I think you had to do this, and I think it's the right move.
Yeah, and Jalen Hurts, probably arguably a top 5 quarterback in the NFL right now, bringing his team to the championship last year, and he's got a bright future ahead of him. So if you're the Eagles, you definitely got to pay him, especially being the head of your team. So one guy that we'll talk about, our last point in the NFL, is DeAndre Hopkins. And the other day he went on live and they were asking him how he felt about certain teams. And it essentially broke down to him either going to the Bills or the Chiefs. They did mention a few other teams like your Patriots. He didn't really seem that interested in that. But it looks like he's going to be going to an AFC powerhouse, depending on what kind of bag, I guess, they're willing to pay him. And we just talked about the Chiefs obviously having to pay Mahomes. But either way, if he goes to one of these two teams, he's still, I would argue, probably a top 3 receiver in the NFL. He's one of those guys that, even though he doesn't always have the counting stats, I'm still going to take him over a lot of these guys just because he's just a pure wide receiver that is good at every single part of his game. And if he gets put on a team with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, it's a wrap. If he gets put on a team with Stephon Diggs, and I mean, they have a few decent running backs, whoever they figure it out to, but obviously Josh Allen, either one of these teams that he joins it's going to be absolutely insane. And if he goes to the Bills, that could help them push them over the edge, I guess, and get past and finally get to a Super Bowl.
Yeah, and that would be very interesting. I mean, when it comes to some of the other teams that he was asked about, he wouldn't fit in New England just because they never pay receivers a lot of money, and Bill O'Brien is back on the coaching staff. Like, that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. There's no chance. The offensive coordinator being that, so not a
Well,
chance.
also Bill O'Brien specifically. They don't have a very good history together.
Yeah. I mean, it was never going to work. With that being said, I mean, Kansas City and Buffalo, if it does come down to these two teams, which I wouldn't lock up right away. In the interview, they didn't ask about every team. I think he would like, I know they just had Odell, but a team like the Ravens, there are some other teams that we could see him go to. But to keep it simple with the Chiefs and the Bills, I really like the Chiefs. I really don't like the Bills when it comes to this. And I'm with you in the same boat. I will come on the record and say, I think DeAndre Hopkins is the most talented receiver in football. I think in that regard, he's only challenged by Devontae Adams. Those are the only two I think are in that top tier of most talented. But when it comes to the Chiefs, I mean, you mentioned he'd be with Travis Kelce. Patrick Mahomes hasn't had, the star-studded receiver in the last couple of seasons after Tyreek Hill left. And he's a different type of receiver than Tyreek. I mean, we saw Patrick Mahomes succeed with Juju and MVS, some taller guys. Why not load up on that? I mean, you can't lose getting a guy like DeAndre Hopkins. And the Chiefs have always found a way to manage their way around the cap. I don't think they'd have any trouble paying him. It's just, how they pay him, what the contract looks like. With the Bills, I worry because if I'm the Bills, I really think they need to invest their money in other stuff. Middle linebacker, getting your draft picks correct, eventually paying Josh Allen that mega contract. I don't like DeAndre Hopkins going there. I mean, you already have Stephon Diggs, who is an insane receiver, and it's Gabe Davis's contract year. If DeAndre Hopkins comes in and takes Gabe Davis's snaps, he's going to be out the door. And if I'm the Bills, I like DeAndre Hopkins a lot, but receiver can be kind of weird. He could have a down year. He could, next year could be his last year where he really performs at this high level. And Gabe Davis is young. He's already a part of your system. He has a great connection with Allen, as we see in the playoffs. I mean, they're a team that chokes in the playoffs, but Gabe Davis always has a great game. So he's been reliable when it counts. I think he's someone that's been loyal to your team. You're better off waiting and paying him and then looking elsewhere for wide receiver than basically kicking him out the door. I mean, he's too good to be pushed to a wide receiver 3 on your depth chart. It would be nice in Madden. It would be nice in, if you're building a fantasy team. But in real life, Gabe Davis is not a wide receiver 3, at least to me.
I guess I'll come and say the opposite. Gabe Davis probably has 3 good breakout games per year and then pretty much does nothing for the rest of the season. And especially he's basically, you could move him to the slot and have a guy like DeAndre Hopkins on one end and Stephon Diggs on the other end. And that's an impossible combo to stop depending on who gets the ball. I think the only issue with that overall would be if Stephon doesn't get the ball, he's going to make a big deal about it. And if DeAndre doesn't get the ball, he'll make a big deal about it. But even with the potential to go to the Chiefs too, with a guy like Travis Kelce, there's not really another guy in there where you're looking at that will get pushed down there. I mean, they have pretty much at this point it's Kadarius Toney and Richie James. So you definitely need another receiver. Both of those guys might not show up for most of the games or be able to play for most of the games, but we'll just have to see what happens with DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think there's a lot of possibilities here, but I'll stick with my guns. I don't think the Bills will be his best fit.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see.
We'll just have to wait and see.
Something that we won't have to wait and see, which we can talk about right now. We'll go over all the playoff series that have started at this point. As of this recording, it's Tuesday, so we only have 2 series that have played 2 games. So we'll talk about those first. The rest have only had 1 game, but there's a lot of storylines going on with pretty much all these series. And the first one I want to talk about is the Warriors and the Kings. And the Kings are currently up 2-0. And all I got to say is I got to come on here and say, free my boy Draymond. He did nothing wrong. Sabonis coming out here both games and grabbing at his feet, and then he finally got it. If you're going to poke the bear, you can't be mad when the bear hits you back. He had him. I guess Draymond, there's a lot of people that don't like him for the things that he does, but most of the time people are talking shit to him and then they get mad when he talks shit back. So you can't be mad when they spin back on you.
I completely disagree. And I like Draymond, but this isn't shit talking. If Draymond got kicked out because he was shit talking, that's one thing, because that's what he's best at, and I understand. But I mean, I watched the clip, and I'll be honest, I'm rooting for the Kings here. But I see Sabonis, and I'm like, okay, he tied up his leg. I was on your side. But then you actually look at the clip, and we get the good angles, and we zoom in. Sabonis gets hit in the eye, comes down to the ground like this, and Draymond's ankle is like in between the arms. You know, I play basketball. I've been in similar positions. The easy thing to do is move your foot up and out, and then he can shit talk Sabonis on the ground all he wants. You can't lift your foot up. He clearly got his foot up. He got it out of the lock and then stomped. I mean, that's just ridiculous to me. I don't understand it. And I also think it takes away from some of the great things we've seen in the series. Malik Monk has been absolutely sensational these last two games. I mean, last game, definitely not as good as his first game. I'll say that for sure. But he's been impressive whether he's been shooting well or not. And then De'Aaron Fox, I mean, we get to the point where these games get super close. You know, these are really good teams, and the Warriors have a ton of experience in these spots. And it's almost like Fox doesn't care. You know, most people would be phased when you have playoff Steph Curry, you know, trying to get around you and shoot shots in your face. De'Aaron Fox has played amazing. I mean, the Kings are up 2-0. If we're being honest, we know how the Warriors do things. Even when they get down, you know, we saw back in 2015, 2016 against the Thunder. I mean, they came back from 3-1. We know they've been upset up 3-1. The point is there's a lot of movement in these series, especially when the Warriors are involved. It's not going to be a sweep, even though the Kings have been impressive. You know, it's going to go back to Golden State. All year, Golden State has been horrible on the road and very good at home. So I'm sure they're going to at least get one of those games. You know, I still think the Kings got this in 7. I'm sticking with my original prediction, but moving on from the Draymond talk, how do you think the series is actually going to end?
Well, it's not a series until a road team wins. And with a series like this, I think the Warriors go back home and they win both home games. And then it's a 3-game series at that point. And with a lot of these first round series, especially in the West, it's not a series until the road team wins, just because if it's a 7-game series and you have home court, if the home team wins every single game, then they win the series. And both of these games have been close. And once Golden State goes back home, I'm not really worried about it. I know the next game, especially at home with all the Draymond stuff, it's going to be absolutely insane in there, just like it was in Sacramento too. Curry last game did not shoot well from the 3. He shot 3 from 13, still ended up dropping 28 points though. And they did end up losing by 8, but they were pretty much in it up until the last few minutes. Just a few shots that didn't go in. And then in the first game too, with a chance to win it in the corner, and Andrew Wiggins misses the shot. Curry had a shot at the end too, but if I'm looking at that, Andrew Wiggins had the go-ahead bucket with 20 seconds left. So I think they'll go back and probably tie this up. I'm not counting out the Warriors yet. I had them winning this series, and I think if they win both games at home, it's a 3-game series at that point. So we'll have to see what happens. If these were blowout games, I would say it's pretty different. But I mean, De'Aaron Fox, obviously, he's going to score in clutch time. He's the best player in the league at that. First game, scoring 38, just having a great game. Not a lot of help, honestly, from a lot of his players. Keegan Murray has pretty much done absolutely nothing this series, averaging 2 points per game. But I guess they don't really need it. They've had help off the bench. Davion Mitchell had a great game last game. And the game before that too, obviously Malik Monk having a great game. So they've been able to get help off the bench. And the problem with the Warriors too is, especially last game we saw, once Draymond fouled out, once they put Kayvon Looney in, who already had 5 fouls, once he can't really do much on defense with 5 fouls.
Yeah, and one thing before we move on to the next series, that I think we failed to mention when we broke down these matchups last week. And one thing I really would have liked to mention, because I'm a big fan of Davion Mitchell, is we look at Jordan Poole off the Warriors bench, and we assume he's going to come out here and, put up big numbers, get good points. But when he has to run around being guarded by Davion Mitchell, he's one of the best on-ball defenders in the league. And, he's young. He's not getting tired out there. It's a task that's much more difficult. And I think if the Warriors could rely on Jordan Poole to go out there and put up 20 a game or something to that effect, then we'd be looking at a different series. So I think that's a big thing that it's a highlight of this series to me. It's important to point out at least.
Yeah. We did. I mean, you talked about it last time too. You weren't really too hot on Jordan Poole in the playoffs. And so far, I mean, he hasn't been performing that well. So we'll see what happens once they go back. Sabonis is officially though on my NBA ops list, and you don't want to be on that list with those other four guys.
Okay.
He's not number one though. Number one will probably not change as long as I watch basketball.
The fans at home don't know who we're talking about. Throw it out there.
Devin Booker will always be my number one op in the NBA. I'll give you guys my list. This is exclusive access. We got Devin Booker, Sabonis, Rudy Gobert, who's absolutely useless, and then we got Dylan Brooks and Desmond Bane. So the Grizzlies, not my favorite team overall. Shout out Triple J though.
I knew a couple of these guys. What did Desmond Bane do?
He's just not good. I don't like him.
All right, let's keep Banding in a happier mood. Let's move on to the Sixers versus Nets series. A series that's the Sixers are winning 2-0. First game they handled business, but we just saw, at least for us, the other day, it was a tough first half. But the Sixers relied on guys like Tyrese Maxey and Tobias Harris to get back into the game. They won in convincing fashion, despite what the score says. So, I mean, how do you think the series is going? How confident are you, and how do you think it's going to end?
So overall, Tobias Harris has been playing amazing. And when we were previewing this series, I said that if the Sixers want to finally have their year, you're going to need Tobias Harris to step up specifically. Tyrese Maxey has proven in his past few playoff series that he's going to go out there and ball no matter what. He's just going to keep shooting. He's one of the best shooters in the league percentage wise. One of his, I forget if it was last year or the year before, but he had one of the best 3-point shooting percentages. And when we look at Tyrese Maxey, it's kind of weird because I don't think anyone really looks at him as that great. Not that he's a bad shooter, but just that he's not really a shooter overall, just because he's so explosive at the rim. I kind of compare him. He plays kind of more like John Wall did, obviously a lot better 3-point shooter, but he's a guard that can get to the rim. And with Tobias dropping at least 20 points in these past two games, 20 points and then 21. Him being on is absolutely massive, especially with last game where we saw a score that looked like a score that Adam Sandler was betting on in Uncut Gems, 96-84. And like you said, that first half wasn't great. They were down and just not looking good at all offensively. James Harden ended the night 3 for 13, 2 from 8 from 3. So not a great game from him, but with the rest of the team on, it's going to be hard to stop. Even with Embiid having a down game, he only shot 11 shots, but he did drop 20, 19, 7, and 3 blocks. He said after the game that he wished he had the Memphis box score people, because I saw at least 5 blocks, but I guess he didn't get as much credit for all those.
Yeah, and you kind of said all the points I wanted to touch on. Embiid, I'm going to give Coach Jacques Vaughn a little bit of credit and also a little bit of criticism. I give him credit that I think his scheme is putting Embiid in positions where he can't really shoot. But, despite what we might come out here and say sometimes, the team is not just Embiid. Guys like Tobias Harris and guys like Maxey are legit with the ball in their hands. And those are the guys that have beat the Nets. I'll give Vaughn a little bit of credit in saying, he's a guy that it's kind of like the old New England Patriots in the basketball form. They shut down the best player and they make the other guys on the team beat them. The problem is the other guys on the Sixers are a guy that should have been an all-star this year, one of the most underrated 2 guards in the league, and a good 3-point shooting wing. Those guys are going to cook the Nets every single time. So, I mean, with that being said, seeing the Sixers perform without Embiid being able to put up a lot of shots and, go out and drop 40 every game, it's actually building some confidence for me in them. It's a little worrying as a Celtics fan, knowing we're probably going to have to take them next round because, when the Sixers role players are hot, they're probably, I would say, the best team in basketball, honestly. When you have Tyrese Maxey dropping 30 plus, I don't know who's stopping the Sixers. So, that game was a little bit ugly the other night for fans, but all in all, I think Sixers fans should be happy with how their team's performing right now, and they're going to sweep the Nets. I think we both know that. It's just, how difficult is it going to be to get out of that series?
Yeah, and my prediction overall was that I thought the Sixers would lose one game, and I thought last night was going to be that game, but then they ended up turning it up. And like you said, shout out King Von. He has a great game plan for stopping Embiid. It's actually, I feel like it's a lot more planned out than we usually see because most teams are like, oh, double Embiid the second he gets the ball. But we haven't seen Embiid get doubled when he's on the low block. They only double him when he's up high, which makes it harder for him to be able to pass out. So it's a good game plan overall, but the Sixers are the best 3-point shooting team in the NBA. They were this year, percentage wise, just above Golden State. And with guys on the corner like PJ Tucker, where he may not shoot that much in a game, but he's going to hit the shots when he needs to. And you can't leave him open. Even if he's 0 for 5 on the night from 3, you're not going to leave him open in the corner because that's his shot. Tobias Harris is going to get to the corner too. And if Tyrese Maxey is playing this insane, then it's going to be hard. And he also said the other night, I guess last night now, that he thinks this is the best team that he's been on just because of the depth. Like we talked about before, DeAnthony Melton, Paul Reed has been absolutely great in the playoffs, both offensively and defensively. Obviously, his defense probably won't show up as much on the stat sheet, but he's been able to put up a lot of great contests, and being that second center off the bench has worked out in his favor a lot. And I'm trusting him, especially once they start to play teams. He's been playing a lot better, and as long as they don't need to put Montrezl Harrell in, we'll be fine, because that's not going to work out well.
I don't know.
So the next series that we have, the rest of these series, we've only seen one game from so far. By the time this episode comes out, there'll be some more games. But we'll start off with the Cleveland Cavaliers against the Stephen A. Smith Knicks. And the Knicks come out with a win in game 1, which I'm not going to lie, I was pretty surprised about. They came out and pretty much took down the Nets from the start of the game. In the second half, Jalen Brunson definitely started to shoot the ball a lot better. He ended with 27 points, and we obviously saw Julius Randle with 19 points. The Knicks ended up winning by 4. Donovan Mitchell drops 38, but doesn't really get much help from the rest of the team.
Yeah, and this series is interesting. I think I'll take blame right here. I was doing the Knicks a little bit of a disservice, saying they had no chance, because they proved me wrong in game 1. Without Julius Randle, contributing for game 1, they were still, lights out. I mean, Jalen Brunson is impressive. We know what we're going to get from Quickly at this point. And, those like rotational big men that step in are actually quite impressive to me. New York, we know how it is when they're hot. They have a lot of juice. Them going out and winning a game on the road was huge. And I think we both discussed that Cleveland is the better team in this series. They're, more suited to win this series, and they definitely match up better if Milwaukee makes out of their first round matchup. I want to see more from Evan Mobley. I know it sounds like I'm not a fan of his. I actually am. And I think he's going to step up. And I think the Cavs are going to win this series. It just needs to happen, especially with Julius Randle on the way back. Mobley's going to have a really big assignment. We already know what Jared Allen can do. And, I don't even think Garland needs to step up and put up 30 or, do anything ridiculous. He just needs to keep getting Mitchell the ball, and the Cavs need to figure it out on defense, because you can't let a team like New York get hot from the outside, or else you don't win. When New York shoots the 3 well, nobody can stop them. And that's what's so interesting about their team, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I still have the Cavs in this series. Donovan Mitchell still dropped. I mean, he shot 30 shots in game 1. He went 14 for 30, dropped 6 from 16 from 3, and he had 38 points. But just going to need more help from a guy like Evan Mobley, like you said. And shout out to him. You left him off your defensive teams, and I feel like we need some respect for Evan Mobley here.
I sound like such a hater, and I brought this up a little bit when we talked about this originally, but it was more just to give credit to Jared Allen. And looking back on it, if I wanted to give more credit to Jared Allen, I probably should have put him on one of my lists. But, it is what it is. I really do like him as a player. And, as I said, I think he's going to be the difference maker in this series. I think it's going to lead to Cleveland making it out of the first round.
Yeah, if I'm the Cavs, after game one performance, I'm not that worried. I think depending on what we see from this second game, not even necessarily a loss, but if the Cavs squeak out another win, and if they win by like 5 points and it's a close game all game, I'd start to get worried. But I do see them coming together and eventually being able to put this away. I mean, I guess we kind of forget that most of these players on the Cavs are still young, inexperienced players on the team. And it's easy to look at Donovan Mitchell, who dropped 38 points, that we talk about being such a great playoff performer, but you're going to need the rest of the guys to step up too. And if I'm the Cavs, I think they will.
Yeah, I mean, we look at guys like Mobley, Okoro, and Garland. They're all under 25. It's all their first playoff experience. And then even Mitchell and Allen, I mean, they both had experience in the playoffs with Utah and Brooklyn, but neither of them have ever been out of the first round. You know, it's still some of their first times performing at this level. But, you could say the same about New York. And, I think we both feel the same. I think Cleveland figures it out.
So next up, we have the Lakers and the Grizzlies. And what an absolute fourth quarter performance from Austin Reeves, coming out and just balling in the fourth quarter. LeBron does exactly what he needs to do, drops 21, 11, and 5, and doesn't need to be the number one scoring option. Anthony Davis, 22 points, 7 blocks, absolutely insane on the defensive end in that game. He was just, I mean, that's probably one of the best defensive games that I've ever seen him play. 7 blocks and 3 steals, 12 rebounds, and 22 points. If he can have that much of an impact in the series, obviously he's not going to be that great defensively every single game stats wise, but if he can do that, obviously going up against a guy like Jaren Jackson, who still dropped 31 points, but Anthony Davis was able to switch onto the other bigs on that team too. I think overall, I had the Lakers winning this series, so I guess I just want to hear, what do you think from this, especially after the Ja Morant injury too?
Yeah, so I mean that was the first thing on my notes in bold. Ja Morant's injury plays a big factor in how I feel about this series. The way I'm going to talk about this, I'm going to talk about this like he's going to be healthy for every game going forward, just for the sake of entertainment here. If he's not, then you can just kind of pencil me down.
I can give you a scoop right now of what we know officially. He's a game time decision, so it's really up in the air.
Exactly. So I'm going to talk as if he's healthy, but if he's not healthy, I think honestly the Lakers probably figure it out. I don't think that's a hot take. But with the Grizzlies, I mean, Austin Reeves was Lance Stevenson against them. And take this in the nicest way possible. I mean, 2014 Indiana Lance Stevenson. You have better players on the court and you don't care. You make people get out of your way and you score at will. That was what Austin Reeves was on. And I loved it. I mean, I'm not really a huge fan of his. I'm not a Lakers fan, but it was so fun to watch. So that's the type of Lakers we need that are going to win. The Lakers where LeBron used to sit in the corner and laugh and make jokes with the fans in the front row, that Lakers team is dangerous, genuinely. With that being said, Jaren Jackson Jr. coming out and playing really good in the first game is exactly what we wanted to see. The Grizzlies couldn't get the win, but he was exceptional. We both know that. If Ja comes back, I'm feeling good. But if the Lakers have this, these role players showing out, the same role players that they didn't even have a couple months ago, same guys that were, rotting on other teams. I specifically talking about Rui Hachimura coming out and putting up 29 points. That's incredible. If we get to see Reeves, who's, turned it up recently, Vanderbilt, D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura, all these new, Reeves new as of the last 2 years, but the rest of them brand new additions to their team show out like this. I mean, I hate to say this, but they're dangerous in the West in general, not even just in this series. If I'm going to come out here with a prediction, assuming Ja comes back, I think the Grizzlies win, but I think it's in 7. I don't think this is a series where the Lakers overhype themselves and then get gentlemen sweeps or whatever. It's not like that. So I guess my top note is I'm the least sure about this series. There's a lot of factors that come into it, but I guess just as my final opinion, if Ja is healthy, he continues to play at a high level, and Jaren Jackson Jr. plays like how he did in game 1 throughout the series, I still think the Grizzlies are a better team. And two of your guys on your hate list are, you never know what you're going to get from them. Specifically, Bane. I don't like Dylan Brooks either. I don't think he's going to do anything. But if Bane can come out here and be that secondary, shooter on the team, I still think the Grizzlies have it personally.
Yeah, I mean, I came out and said I had the Lakers in 7 in my official bracket, but if the Lakers come out, if Ja doesn't play the next game, if they go 2-0 on the road, it's not looking good for the Grizzlies. Like we talked about, Jaren Jackson obviously having a great game, but Dylan Brooks and Desmond Bane, if I'm leaving the fate of my team between those two guys, they're either going to both drop 30 or they're both going to drop 5. We just don't know. Desmond Bane went 3 for 10 from 3. He ended up with 22 points. He had 7 free throws that he made. That obviously helped him, but 6 from 18 overall, not great. But he's your second leading highest scorer. And even if we look at the Lakers, there was only 5 guys in double digits, but all of those guys had at least 19 points. And that's going to be hard to stop because we don't know who's those guys are going to be. This game, it happened to be Rui, but next game, Vanderbilt. Between those two guys, with the forwards, the way that they're kind of set up, and not really having a traditional center on their team, Anthony Davis doesn't want to be, he doesn't identify as a center. And it just depends on what we'll see from this team. I mean, Dennis Schroeder too he didn't have a great game. He didn't really contribute that much, but he's a guy where if I'm in the playoffs, he could turn up any game. And I guess that's what the Lakers have been trying to do these past few years since they've had LeBron. They're trying to get these vets on the bench that they were hoping they'd get a really good game out of them. But I think they finally found a mix of guys to where it kind of reminds me of that 2020 championship team where the guys can go out there and perform. And if they don't, there's going to be a guy that can back up, that can perform for them.
Yeah. One thing I just want to throw in is I think the Lakers got really lucky with Steven Adams' injury. You still got to go and play the games, and they're a 7th seed. This isn't like an excuse or anything. But if Steven Adams is in the series, it's a lot different because if I'm being honest, you can't start Xavier Tillman in a playoff game at center, especially when non-identifying center Anthony Davis is on the other side. It's not a good matchup for you. And Jaren Jackson Jr. can guard him all he wants, but it's not like you can guard the same guy the whole game. It's not like football where you move your matchups around. It's fluid. Some guys, they move spots. If Steven Adams is there, Steven Adams is not like the greatest defender in the world or anything, but he's big. We all know that he can rebound. So it lets Anthony Davis do this inside-outside thing. And on defense, it lets him to put way more attention on his defensive side. And as you mentioned, he was exceptional. So I think the Lakers are in a good spot. I'm not going to be honest. I'm going to stick with my Grizzlies pick, but man, the Lakers are looking good after the first game. Very, very good.
Yeah. And if you're going to have Tillman out there, you might as well just start Kenneth Lofton, my boy, rookie of the year in the G League. But like you said, Steven Adams would definitely make a difference in this series too, just because of the matchups wise. But I still think this is going to be a great game overall, or I guess great series overall. And Dylan Brooks talking to LeBron makes it even better because we've seen what happens to guys that talk to LeBron in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't even want to talk about him. Let's talk about someone else.
We can move over to the Celtics, I guess, if that makes you a little more happy. Obviously, taking down the Hawks in game 1, they won by 13, but they were up by, I think it was 25 or 30 going into the 4th. I guess overall, we've seen kind of the Celtics not really blow the lead, but kind of just take their foot off the brakes. It's a game against the Hawks. I'm not really that worried at this point, but I've definitely noticed watching most of their games this season that sometimes in that 4th quarter, they can take the foot off the brake. Specifically, I can remember against the Cavs, we were watching that game live. But overall, Jaylen Brown scoring 29 and being that guy that we talked about before who's going to ball in the playoffs no matter what. Tatum dropping 25, going 10 for 23. And they had a great game. Derek White dropping 24, only running 8 men in the playoffs already, which is kind of interesting to look at. But I guess Blake Griffin doesn't deserve the minutes
No, I mean, to be honest, the Celtics love to do these short lineups in the playoffs, and it makes sense. I mean, it's the playoff time. You got to shorten the rotation down. You got to get the best guys on the court, and the Celtics like to prepare in advance. I mean, we didn't even see Grant Williams get minutes, like very many in the first game at all, and that's a guy that you expect to be playing more often. But I mean, with that being said, the Celtics are just the better team in this matchup. I mean, it's not. We both know that. But with that being said, you bring up a really good point that I was going to bring up, and they do blow the lead a little bit. It didn't matter in game one because you're up by 30 at halftime. You can blow the
And
lead
it's the
and
Hawks.
yeah, and still lose by 13. But you say it's the Hawks, and I completely agree. But with Trae Young, you know he likes to have these big games, one big game in the playoffs each year to show that he deserves to be there. And I would not be surprised if Boston goes into halftime maybe up by 5 or 10, and then they start slipping the lead and Trae Young starts hitting shots. So I'm not going to come on here and tell you there's one series here where I know it's a sweep. This is not it. This one, Trae Young could go and have a game. DeJounte Murray is still a guy. You know, I like John Collins quite a bit. He matches up well against the Celtics. But I mean, as a Celtics fan, I'm not worried. I just hope it can stay to 5. Our guys can be rested when they have to go against, a more threatening team like the 76ers, more than likely.
Yeah. I guess the point that I was bringing up with that too, kind of taking your foot off the brake in the fourth quarter, especially if they end up playing against the Sixers in the second round,
Yeah.
which I'd be surprised if they don't. They could end up with problems, but also we know Doc Rivers doesn't like to hold on to leads too. So we might just end up seeing a matchup in the second round where neither team wants to win the game in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, whoever's up by halftime in that series is going to lose the game every game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not really much to talk about in that series overall, but we'll go over. I'm assuming this is the series you're talking about, the sweep, because for me, it is too. We'll go into the Heat versus the Bucks. The Heat winning game 1. And so you're saying that the Heat are going to sweep this series?
No, not quite.
So very interesting development, though, from the first game that we saw. Giannis going down, just a terrible fall onto the ground. His back absolutely got. I'm trying. His back did not. Yeah. So a team like the Heat, where if this was a team like the Hawks or any other one of the play-in teams, I wouldn't be worried. But a team like the Heat that we've seen with all these veterans, it's going to be really interesting for the rest of the series. And I might be a little overreacting in this sense, but Jimmy Butler is not going to keep his foot off the gas pedal. He's going to keep these guys going. And Tyler Hero, it looks like, is going to be out. He has a broken hand. So I think I'm pretty sure he's completely out for the playoffs at this point. But they still have players on that team. I mean, we haven't seen, I don't even know the last time we saw Duncan Robinson play basketball. But if he comes back on the floor, he's still a shooter. You're not going to leave him wide open.
Yeah, I think you might be overreacting in a sense, but I see what you're saying. Tyler Hero going out with injury is kind of what wraps this up for me. I would be really worried if he was available, but considering he's going to be out for 4 to 6 weeks, so definitely this whole series, obviously, I don't see how the Heat come away with this one. Giannis is going to be back. Giannis gets hurt in the playoffs every year, it feels like, and then comes back looking exactly the same. I was impressed with Bam. Obviously, I was impressed with Jimmy. But Chris Middleton putting up 33 points in game 1 kind of sold it to me. If Chris Middleton is shooting confidently and consistently, then Giannis just has to go out there and be Giannis, and they can beat anybody. I think the Heat are going to give them a little bit of scare. I think in Miami, they're going to pull a game out. I wouldn't be surprised. But I still think Miami it's too tough to win consistently in Milwaukee. So I don't think Miami comes out on top. I think the Bucks have this one in the bag.
Yeah. I originally came out and I had the Bucks winning in a sweep against I had the Bulls in the 8th seed, but even against the Heat, I still think they're probably going to get it done. I would say in 6 at the latest. I don't think this series is going to 7, but I could definitely see the Heat coming out with another game, like you said. And then the next series that we have, which is 1-0 right now, is the Nuggets, who won by 29 against the Timberwolves. And this series overall, I mean, we both have talked about how the Timberwolves aren't necessarily our favorite teams overall. Rudy Gobert like I talked about earlier, not my favorite player, ends up dropping 8 points with a plus minus of -28 in the first game. So great performance from him. It's really worth it trading up their whole entire future.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this earlier. The we talked about this earlier. Uh, the Timberwolves are just no match. I mean, say what you will about Cat, he's not a playoff performer. He never really has been. But I mean, specifically Rudy Gobert, he can't handle Jokic. He doesn't do anything on the offensive side. And guys like Michael Porter Jr., he shot the lights out. There's a point around the fourth quarter where they were almost up by 30. They ended up winning the game by, you know, around that same margin.
29,
So
yeah.
yeah, 29. So I'm a fan of the Nuggets this year. I think they're still in my finals. So the Timberwolves aren't really a problem for them, in my opinion.
Yeah, I didn't really care who the Timberwolves played in the first round. If they played against the Grizzlies, they're getting swept. I just don't think this team is good overall. And
Yeah.
Anthony Edwards shot 6 for 15, and he was their leading scorer with 18 points. And that's why they dropped the same amount of points as a varsity high school team in the
Yeah, and
first game of the series.
I want to jump in here because this is something we talked about off camera, and I said I was going to bring into a podcast at some point. Can we talk about how Anthony Edwards is one of the least efficient scorers in the whole NBA? I like the guy, but he is not a good shooter, and he's put in a position on this Timberwolves team, especially with D'Angelo Russell leaving, where he has to shoot a lot of jumpers. He's not good at it. He's good at driving. You brought up a guy like John Wall earlier. He's a little bit bigger than John Wall ever was, a little bit stronger, but he's not a shooter. And when you put him in positions where you're either playing down low or letting Anthony Edwards shoot on the perimeter, it's horrible. I mean, shout out to the Timberwolves coach. Losing his name right now, but I think he's a good coach. He's up there in the coach of the year odds. He didn't end up top 3, but he was in that 5 range. I don't get it. I don't understand why you're not using your players to their strengths. And that's why I think we look at a Timberwolves team, which should be really good on paper, and they're not even a threat. We're not even worried. Denver's not even worried, and they have to play them. I mean, Minnesota's also not a team that I'd be scared to play on the road. So there's just a lot of things. I hate to come on here and shit talk a team, but the Timberwolves aren't a playoff team. They're a regular season team that forces their way into a low seed and then gets swept. I do not believe in them in the slightest.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing that you're talking about too with Anthony Edwards, the way that he plays, and especially being a player that succeeds a lot when he drives, having Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns in the paint. This team is not constructed well at all. And I understand the idea, obviously, having Anthony Edwards and Karl Anthony Towns, that's completely separate. I mean, we've seen historically, you got to have a good point guard and a center, and that works out well for you. Obviously, they're not two of the greatest ever, but just when you're building up a team, it's not a bad idea to have a good guard and a good center. But once you threw Rudy Gobert in there and traded your whole entire future, it just is not going to work out. And I don't know where this team goes because they're in the worst place in sports right now, where when you're a low seed in the playoffs and you're not going to get a high first round pick, and you're not going to make the finals or the championship in your sport, and you're just going to end up being an 8th seed in the playoffs, it's never going to go well for you. And we saw this last year. Last year, they actually put up a fight in the first round, but this year the team is bad.
I mean, I talked about it on one of the videos the other day, how this little Charlotte Hornets tier you get in where you can't compete but you're not bad enough. The Timberwolves, as you mentioned, I think it's great analysis. They're in a worse spot because at least Charlotte could walk out with the top pick this year. Minnesota's got nothing, and if they do tank, they don't even have their own picks. They're screwed. It's the same thing. I think a great comparison would be the Brooklyn Nets after trading for KG and Paul Pierce. It's like, okay, your roster's better on paper, but you're still not competing and you ruined your future. So I think, honestly, we're going to see Minnesota in a place like Brooklyn was for, about 5-6 years, a couple of years ago.
Yeah, but they're in Minnesota, so no one really
Nobody's
cares.
going. Nobody's going to go to Minnesota.
Yeah. So the last series that we'll talk about in this episode is the Suns and the Clippers, and game 1 was exactly how I thought it was going to go. It was a close game. The Clippers end up pulling it out by 5, and the Clippers, I came on here talking about them. I had the Suns winning this series in 6, and I'm not really changing my prediction. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 7, but there was a reason why I had the Clippers as my Western Conference Finals favorite for so long. They kind of fell off towards the end of the season, but this is exactly why. Kawhi Leonard ends up putting on an absolute clinic, dropping 38. And with no Paul George, they still get it done. Russell Westbrook dropped, he went 3 for 19 from the field, but we've seen what happens when he goes 3 for 19 from the field. He puts on a performance everywhere else on the court, and he only dropped 9 points. But when you look at him, this is the definition of a game where you just have to look past the stats and watch him play. He was out there on every single possession, doing whatever he could. And at the end, getting a huge block off of Devin Booker and throwing the ball off of him out of bounds. That I was watching that play, and I had the Suns winning this series. Once they gave it to Devin Booker, I knew exactly what he was going to do. I knew that he was going to throw the game away like he does every single time. I don't know why he's getting the ball and you're not giving Kevin Durant the ball, but I guess I'm not the coach.
I mean, I'll tell you why they didn't give Kevin Durant the ball. And I'm not going to, and believe me, this is not me saying it's Kevin Durant's fault. But I mean, that's why the Clippers are so interesting, because I have Kawhi Leonard. I don't know how we got in this perception that Kawhi Leonard is not one of the best defenders in basketball anymore, because I completely disagree. If there's one dude on the whole planet I want to stop Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard is my first pick. So, I mean, we saw in the third quarter of that game, Kevin Durant had 5 assists, amazing playmaking, but he didn't even shoot. Didn't take a single shot in the third quarter, and he rarely shot in the fourth quarter, not many at least. So, I mean, with that being said, it's good matchup wise, and I think Russell Westbrook just had the worst statistical good game in NBA history, because that was unbelievable. I mean, I watched that whole game and I thought Westbrook was playing amazing. Then I look at the stat sheet and I'm like, oh my God, you know what I'm saying? Like,
I mean, he almost had a triple double though.
yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I like you never would think he shot so bad if you were watching the game. Obviously, he was off, but you didn't think it was that bad. My point being, I guess, KD in the playoffs is scary. He's scary every single year. But if there's one guy that's played good against KD in the playoffs, it's Kawhi Leonard. And with Russell Westbrook encouraging me by playing so good on defense and hitting those late free throws when they mattered, he is, I'm looking at him as a positive in this series. Depending on when Paul George is available to come back, I still like the Clippers. I picked the Clippers originally, but I think we're on the same page that the series is going to be really entertaining, really back and forth. I'm going to stick with the Clippers in 7, although winning game 1 is very on the road is very encouraging for a team, especially like the Clippers. This is not going to be smooth sailing. It's going to be very tough, but I'm still confident that the Clippers can pull it out. Winning game 1 was, it was an extra check next to my boxes, but it doesn't sell me on anything particularly. I'm going to stick with my guns.
Yeah, I think with it being such a close game too. The interesting part about this though is even with Paul George coming back, you would say the Clippers won game 1 and he's going to come back and they're going to do better. It's kind of weird to think about because I don't know, like obviously the team's going to be better, but I still think it's going to be as competitive overall just because of the way the matchups are going to work. Like he's going to go out there and he's going to be going up against Devin Booker and they're going to cancel each other out. Westbrook and Chris Paul are probably scoring wise going to cancel each other out. They had pretty close statistical games last game. And like we said, Kawhi and KD are going to go at it too. So it's just going to depend on the rest of the players in this series. And like you said, Kevin Durant is a scary player because he barely shot the ball in the second half and still was the leading scorer on that team.
Yeah. I'm going to come in here one point that I disagreed with there. And I'm going to tear down Eric Gordon to make my point. So apologies to Eric Gordon. He sucks. He is not that good. He played horrible. He was genuinely, while I was watching the game, when Eric Gordon put up a shot, I knew it was missing the whole game. And it was like he made a couple, but it was just not fun to watch him play basketball. He is not clutch. He does not mold well with this team. I don't care like any of that stuff. You're replacing him with Paul George. And I know Paul George off the injury is a little scary sometimes, but he is much better. The fact that Devin Booker did not get canceled out by Eric Gordon by any means, but the fact that Devin Booker couldn't win a team a game while being guarded by Eric Gordon says enough for me. When that's Paul George, obviously I don't think Devin Booker is going to necessarily do worse just because of that, but amplifies the Clippers scoring while Kawhi was already scoring amazingly and efficiently. It's going to help their scoring. It's going to be better defense. And size-wise, it's much more compatible with Devin Booker when it comes to guarding. I think Paul George coming back is going to make the Clippers a much better team. But the part I did agree with what you said is probably going to be just as competitive. I think it's going to minimum 6, definitely 7 either way. But Paul George coming back is no small thing for the Clippers. I like the analysis. I think sometimes we assume star players are going to come back and it's going to change the whole series. This is one case where I really think it's going to make the Clippers a different team. I think the Clippers with Paul George are a team that can go out and maybe shock the Nuggets round 2. The Clippers without Paul George, I honestly think they could get swept by the Nuggets. It's just 2 different levels of competition at that point.
Well, I do want to talk about your boy Eric Gordon. He did shoot 50% from the field and was the second highest scorer on the Clippers with almost 20 points.
Yeah, and again, there are some things that you can't see by the stat sheet. As we just talked about with Russell Westbrook, Eric Gordon was horrible in the second half. There were about 3 different instances where the Clippers had a chance, and I know you're pulling up the second half numbers. And there are 2 or 3 instances where Eric Gordon had a chance to, hit the dagger shot, put the Clippers up by 4, put the Clippers up by 3, and he missed it every single time. And it got to the point where you had to give the ball to Kawhi every single possession. And Kawhi, just made tough shot after tough shot. When Paul George is in the game, I think it's a different scenario. It's a lot easier. It's hard to guard Kawhi Leonard. It's a lot harder when Paul George is on the court. So I think that sets up the Clippers in a really good spot.
Yeah. I think this is probably going to be one of the best series in the first round, probably the best overall, in my opinion. The only series where, even though Paul George is out, he'll come back, obviously, and I think it's going to be as competitive, but the only one where we haven't really seen an injury kind of plague the series or it being an obvious win for the other team. The West is going to be crazy depending on whoever comes out of this series. I wouldn't be surprised if they win the West, just because both of these teams are great on both ends of the ball. I guess my one takeaway from game 1 is just don't give Devin Booker the ball in clutch time.
And my one takeaway is that this is the first 4 or 5 matchup I've seen maybe in my whole time watching the playoffs where both teams could win the finals. Like, even just to look out East this year, we like Cleveland as a sleeper, but neither of them or New York win the finals this year. So it's very interesting. And I think we had a lot of good chatter on this series because it's a lot of different factors and it's going to be fun. This is like, out of all these series, if you're not a basketball watcher, this is the must-watch one, if I had to suggest it.
Yeah. I guess that's really it for this episode. Next week we'll come on and we'll have more about some of these series. Some of them might be wrapped up at this point. If we do see a sweep series like the Sixers and the Nets could be over by then. The Nuggets and the Pelicans, I'm not really sure scheduling wise how it'll work with all this stuff.
The Pelicans didn't even make it there.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, see, I just they're already out of it.
I'm just talking shit. Nah, I mean, I would rather the Pelicans were here if I was being honest with you.
Yeah, I would rather see that than the Timberwolves play. But I guess with that being said, we'll have more to talk about next week and we'll have our final mock drafts. We'll go a little try hard with these. We'll throw a lot of these mock drafts that we've had. We've only had like kind of maybe 2 trades at most, but going into this, with my final mock draft, I'm going to pretend like I'm the GM for every team. So if I see someone at 7 that I like and I want to trade up, then we'll do that. We'll kind of go crazy with this one, having it be the last mock draft. And then we'll talk about everything that's going on with the playoffs too. So that being said, we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you, guys.